The woman stood near the back of the long hallway, holding a folded paper in both hands. It was her audition number. The paper was worn at the edges because she had checked it many times already, as if it might change. Around her, the hallway was full of people who looked like they belonged there. They wore neat coats, polished shoes, and carried expensive-looking music folders. Some spoke confidently about famous teachers, competitions, and concert halls. Others laughed softly, already comfortable in this place. She did not join any conversation. She stayed quiet, her back against the wall, her eyes moving slowly from face to face. Her clothes were clean but plain. A simple sweater, dark pants, shoes that had clearly seen many years. Nothing about her stood out, and that was exactly how most people seemed to see her, or rather, not see her at all. Every so often, someone glanced at her, then quickly looked away. A few glances lingered longer, followed by raised eyebrows or small smiles that were not kind. One young man leaned toward his friend and whispered something. They both laughed, not loudly, but enough. The woman noticed. She always noticed. She had spent most of her life noticing things like that. This was a well-known piano audition. It's held once a year in the city's old concert building. The kind of place where chandeliers hung high above polished floors, and the walls seemed to remember every note ever played there. Only a few performers were chosen each year. For many, it could change everything. The woman had almost not come that morning. She had stood in her small kitchen, staring at the clock while the kettle boiled. Her hands had shaken as she poured the water. She told herself it was foolish. She told herself she was too old for this kind of dream. Too ordinary. Too late. But something deeper, quieter, had pushed her forward anyway. The same thing that had pushed her forward many times before. Now she was here, surrounded by people who looked like the picture of success. She felt out of place, like she had stepped into someone else's life by mistake. A door at the end of the hallway opened. A staff member called out the next audition number. A young woman in a tailored coat stood up quickly. She smiled, confident, and walked through the door without looking back. The hallway buzzed with quiet comments about her background and training. The woman by the wall took a slow breath. Her number was coming soon. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Her fingers moved slightly, as if pressing invisible keys. This habit had followed her everywhere for years, on buses, in grocery lines, while waiting for water to boil. Music lived in her hands even when there was no piano. Another number was called, then another. When her number was finally spoken, there was a brief pause. She looked up, almost surprised, as if she had not expected it to happen so soon. She straightened her shoulders and stepped forward. As she walked down the hallway, the quiet grew heavier. A few people watched her openly now. Their eyes traveled from her shoes to her sweater, then to her face. Some looked confused. Others looked amused. Inside the audition room, 3 judges sat behind a long table. They were all experienced, respected figures in the music world. Their faces were calm, professional, and tired. They had already heard many performances that day. The woman stopped a few feet from the piano. The instrument was beautiful, a grand piano with a black surface so polished it reflected the lights above. For a moment, she simply looked at it. One judge glanced at her papers. Another checked the time. The third adjusted his glasses. "Please state your name and your piece." One of them said without much warmth. She spoke softly but clearly. Her voice did not shake as much as she had feared. There was a short silence after she finished speaking. One judge raised an eyebrow. Another leaned back slightly in his chair. "Do you have formal training?" One asked. She answered honestly. The judges exchanged a quick look. It was not cruel, but it was not encouraging either. They had heard answers like this before, and they rarely ended well. "You may begin when ready," the first judge said, already reaching for his pen before she sat down. A small sound came from the back of the room, a quiet laugh that someone tried and failed to hide. She did not turn around. She had heard worse sounds than that in her life. She walked to the bench and sat. She adjusted it carefully, just a little closer, just a little higher. Her movements were calm, practiced, unhurried. This was not new to her. Still, the room did not expect much. From the hallway outside, few people had gathered near the door, curious. Some wanted to see what would happen. Others were simply waiting for their turn and had nothing better to do. They peeked in, saw her at the piano, and shared knowing looks. A woman whispered, "Is she serious?" Another replied, "Maybe she's just trying her luck." The judges did not comment. They waited. The woman placed her hands on her lap. She did not rush. She took a slow breath, then another. In that moment, the noise of the building faded. The hallway, the whispers, the judges, the years, all of it grew quiet inside her. Her mind traveled back, not to the audition, but to the first piano she had ever touched. It was old, with chipped keys, and a sound that was never quite right. It sat in the corner of a room that smelled of dust and time. She had been younger then, but even now. The memory felt close. She opened her eyes. Her hands rose and hovered over the keys, before the first note was played. Most people in the room had already decided how this would end. They expected awkward mistakes, weak sound, maybe a quick stop. Some judges prepared polite comments in their minds. Some listeners prepared their boredom, not expected to be surprised, not yet. And as her fingers finally touched the keys, the room leaned unknowingly toward a moment that would not be forgotten. As her fingers rested above the keys, time seemed to slow for her. The room was still, but her thoughts were moving far away, back through years she rarely spoke about. She did not see the judges or the piano anymore. She saw long days that started before sunrise and ended late at night. Days filled with work that left her body tired and her hands rough, yet never too tired to remember music. She remembered a small rented room where she once lived. The walls were thin and every sound traveled easily. There was no space for a real piano, only an old keyboard someone had given her. A few keys were cracked. Some notes did not sound right. Still, she played at every chance she got. She played softly at night so no one would complain. When the sound faded, she imagined the missing notes in her head. Life had not turned out the way she once imagined. When she was younger, she believed music would be her future. She practiced whenever she could, but money was always tight. Lessons were expensive. Opportunities went to others who had more support, more time, more luck. One by one, the doors closed. Then life demanded other things from her. There were years when music had fit into the smallest corners of her day. She worked jobs that paid little and took much. She stood for long hours, cleaned, lifted, served, and smiled when she didn't feel like smiling. Some days her hands ached so badly she could barely hold a cup, yet at night she still placed them on the keys, even if only for a few minutes. Music became less about dreams and more about breathing. It was how she released what she could not say. The sadness, the frustration, the quiet anger at a world that moved on without her. She did not play for applause. There was no one listening. She played because not playing felt worse. There were people who told her, "Stop." They said it was childish, unrealistic. They said it was time to let go and be practical. She nodded, agreed, and went on with her life. But she never truly stopped. Music stayed with her the way memories do, always present. Even when ignored, she remembered the day she found out about the audition. A small notice on a community board, half hidden by flyers for lost pets and language classes. She had stood there longer than she meant to, reading the words again and again. At first, she laughed quietly to herself. It felt ridiculous. People like her did not belong in places like that. She walked away, then came back. She took a photo of the notice on her phone. That night, she barely slept. Doubt fought with something stubborn and hopeful inside her. For weeks, she argued with herself. She listed reasons not to go. Her age, her lack of recent training, her simple life, every reason sounded logical. Yet every time she sat at the keyboard, the same thought returned. What if this was not about winning anything? What if it was just about being heard once? So she prepared. She practiced the piece slowly at first. Her fingers were not as fast as they once were, but they were steady. They remembered more than she expected. She paid attention to every note, every pause. She did not aim to be perfect. She aimed to be honest. Some nights, frustration took over. She made mistakes and started again. Sometimes she stopped and cried quietly, not from sadness alone, but from the weight of carrying this dream for so long. Still, she returned the next day now, sitting at the grand piano. All of that lived inside her hands. One judge cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Another tapped a pen lightly against the table, already restless. From the back of the room, a whisper drifted again, followed by a soft laugh. She ignored it. She placed her fingers on the keys once more. This time, she felt something steady rise in her chest. Not confidence exactly. More like acceptance. Whatever happened next, she knew she had earned this moment. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing slowed. The first note was ready, waiting. She thought of all the times she had been overlooked. The conversations that stopped when she entered a room. The way people judged her before she spoke. She thought of the quiet strength it took to keep going when no one was watching. This was not revenge. This was not about proving anyone wrong. This was about telling a story she had carried for years. Outside the audition room, people continued to wait. Some checked their phones. Some adjusted their clothes in reflections. A few still glanced through the door, expecting little more than an awkward performance. Inside, the judges sat forward slightly, not out of interest but out of habit. They were ready to listen, but not to be moved. The woman closed her eyes. In that brief second before sound, her life felt whole. Every wrong turn, every delay, every quiet night lead here. She did not know what the judges would think. She did not know how this would end, but she knew one thing clearly. When she played, she would play as herself. Not as someone younger. Not as someone polished. Not as someone trying to fit in. Just as a woman who had lived, lost, endured, and still loved music enough to sit here, her fingers pressed down. And with that first note, something unseen began to shift in the room, even if no one realized it yet. The first note filled the room softly. Not loud enough to demand attention, but clear enough to be felt. It was gentle, almost cautious, like someone knocking on a door instead of pushing it open. A few people near the back shifted their weight, surprised that the sound was not weak or unsure. The judges did not react right away. They had learned to stay neutral. Still, one of them stopped writing for a moment. Another lifted his eyes from the paper. The music had caught them slightly off guard. The woman continued. Her fingers moved with care, pressing each key as if it mattered deeply. There was no rush. The notes flowed slowly, connected by long breaths of silence. It did not sound like a performance meant to impress. It sounded like a story being told, one piece at a time. In the hallway outside, a low laugh faded into nothing. Someone who had been leaning against the wall stepped closer to the door. They frowned, listening more carefully now. Inside the room, the piano's sound began to change. What started softly grew stronger, fuller. Her hands, once still, now moved with quiet confidence. The bench no longer creaked. Her shoulders stayed relaxed. She leaned slightly into the instrument, as if speaking directly to it. A judge cleared his throat again, but this time it was not impatience. It was something closer to uncertainty. This was not how beginners played. The woman's face remained calm. Her eyes stayed closed, not to block the room out, but to let something deeper come forward. Every note carried weight, shaped by pauses that felt intentional, not empty. The piano seemed to answer her, filling the space with warmth. The people watching had stopped whispering. One woman near the door slowly lowered her phone, forgetting she had been scrolling. A man who had earlier smirked crossed his arms, his expression changing without him realizing it. Something about the music made it hard to stay detached. The judges leaned forward now. One rested his elbows on the table. Another's pen lay forgotten beside the paper. The woman reached a more difficult passage. Her fingers moved faster, but never wildly. There was control in every motion. A few sharp notes cut through the air, filled with emotion that felt almost raw. It was not anger, not sadness alone, but something layered and honest. The room felt smaller. A breath was held. No one knew when they had stopped breathing normally, only that they had. Outside, someone whispered. "She's actually good," no one answered. The woman did not hear them. She was far away now inside the music. Memories surfaced and passed without stopping her. Long nights, quiet rooms, worn keys under tired fingers. All of it poured into the sound without effort, as if it had been waiting for this space. A judge shifted in his seat. His expression had changed from polite distance to focused attention. He glanced briefly at the other judges, then back at the woman's hands. This was not luck. The music grew stronger, then softer again. She allowed the notes to fall gently, like something being set down with care. The piano responded with a richness that filled the corners of the room. One listener wiped their eyes quickly, embarrassed by the sudden emotion. Another sat very still, staring at the woman as if seeing her for the first time. The performance was no longer about appearance or background. Those details had faded into nothing. There was only the sound and the feeling it carried. The woman reached a quiet section, barely above silence. Her fingers pressed lightly, almost hovering. The room leaned in, afraid to miss anything. Even the building itself seemed to listen. A judge swallowed. He had heard thousands of performances in his career. Many were perfect. Many were forgettable. This one was neither. The music rose again, not fast, but sure. It carried strength that did not ask permission. Each note landed exactly where it should, shaped by someone who understood not just how to play, but why. The woman's breathing matched the rhythm. Her body moved subtly with the flow, as natural as walking. There was no tension in her hands, no sign of fear, only presence. Someone near the door slowly stepped back, making room for others who had gathered. The hallway was silent now. No laughter. No whispers as the final section approached. The air felt heavy with expectation. The judges sat completely still. No one checked the time. The woman slowed, letting the notes stretch. She gave them space to linger. The piano sang softly under her touch, then gradually grew quiet again. The last note hung in the air. She held her hands above the keys for a moment longer, not because she wanted applause, but because the story was not finished until the silence spoke back. Then she lowered her hands to her lap. No one moved. The room was frozen, caught between what had been expected and what had just happened. The judges looked at one another, unsure who should speak first. The people at the door forgot why they had been there. The woman opened her eyes. For the first time since she entered the room, she became aware of the space around her again. The lights, the faces, the quiet. She stood slowly, smoothing her sweater out of habit. She nodded politely toward the judges, as if this were any other moment in her life. She did not smile. She did not wait. She turned to leave. That was when a judge finally spoke. "Please," said, his voice lower than before. She paused. He cleared his throat, choosing his words carefully. "Could you tell us where you trained?" The question landed differently now. It was no longer dismissive. It carried respect. The woman answered honestly. Just as she had earlier, the judges exchanged looks again. But this time, there was no doubt in their eyes. Outside, someone let out a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. The woman stood quietly, waiting. Whatever came next. She had already done what she came to do, and everyone in the room knew it. The silence after the music felt heavier than the sound itself. It pressed gently on everyone in the room, as if the air needed time to understand what had just happened. The woman stood there, hands resting at her sides, waiting without expectation. She had learned long ago not to rush moments like this. One of the judges finally shifted in his chair. The movement sounded louder than it should have. He glanced down at his notes, then back up at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Thank you," he said slowly. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Not the polite kind given to end a poor performance, but something closer to genuine respect. Another judge nodded. "Yes, thank you," he added, his voice softer than before. The third judge leaned back, exhaling through his nose. He looked thoughtful, almost unsettled. The woman inclined her head slightly. She did not speak. She had said everything she needed to say through the piano. From the hallway, people began to stir. Someone whispered again, but this time the tone was different. It was not amused or dismissive. It was confused, impressed, unsure. That didn't sound like someone just trying their luck. A voice murmured. Inside the room, the judges exchanged quiet looks, the kind that passed between people who realized they might have been wrong. One of them asked her to sit again. She did, calmly placing her hands back on her lap. She noticed how the bench no longer felt cold. Or maybe she simply didn't feel it anymore. "Can you tell us about your musical background?" a judge asked. The question was careful now. Measured, she answered simply. She spoke of early interest, of practicing alone, of years passing without formal stages or audiences. She did not dramatize her story. She did not downplay it either. It was just the truth, spoken plainly as she talked. The judges listened closely. No interruptions. No glances at the clock. One of them asked why she chose this piece. She paused before answering. "Because it says what I never could," she said. The room went quiet again. The judges nodded slowly, as if that answer explained more than technique ever could. Outside, the hallway had filled with people who were no longer waiting only for their turn. They were waiting to see what would happen next. A few looked at her through the doorway with something like awe. Others looked uncomfortable, remembering their earlier laughter. The woman noticed none of it. She was focused only on the present moment. One judge leaned forward. "You understand that this program is very demanding," he said. "It requires time, commitment, and—" he hesitated. "A certain level of preparation." She met his eyes. "I understand," she said. There was no apology in her voice. No pleading. Just certainty. Another judge smiled faintly. "Your playing shows deep understanding," he said. "That doesn't come from shortcuts." The woman listened, but she did not let the words lift her too high. Praise, like doubt, was something she had learned to hold gently. They asked her a few more questions. Practical ones. Simple ones. Each time she answered honestly. At last one judge nodded toward the door. "We will discuss and inform you," he said. She stood again and thanked them. Her voice was steady as she walked toward the door. Something unexpected happened. The man who had spoken the least rose from his chair. "Before you go," he said. She turned. "I want you to know," he continued, "that what you played reminded me why I chose music in the first place." The words caught her off guard. For a moment, she did not know how to respond. Then she smiled, small and sincere. "Thank you," she said. She stepped into the hallway. The space felt different now. The same walls, the same floor, but the air had changed. Conversations stopped as she passed. People moved aside without realizing they were doing it. A young performer looked at her with open curiosity. Another with quiet respect. Someone she had noticed earlier, the one who laughed, avoided her eyes. She walked slowly, not out of pride, but because her legs felt weak. The weight she had carried for years was shifting. Her body needed time to adjust. She reached a bench near the exit and sat down. Her hands trembled slightly now that the moment had passed. She pressed them together, breathing deeply. She did not know the outcome yet. Nothing was promised, but something important had already changed. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not judged. Not dismissed, seen, and as the door to the audition room closed behind her, the people inside remained quiet, aware that they had just witnessed something rare, not perfection. But truth, she sat on the bench near the exit for a long time. People walked past her, some quietly, some whispering. A few offered small smiles. One person nodded as if they shared a secret. She returned the gestures politely, but her mind was elsewhere. She replayed the music in her head, not to judge it, not to change it, but simply to feel it again. There were moments she wished she could hold on to forever. The sound of the final note, the stillness that followed, the look on the judges' faces when they realized they had not expected what they heard. For once, the memory did not bring doubt. It brought calm. After a while, a staff member stepped out of the audition room and called her number again. Her heart skipped. She stood slowly, smoothing her sweater as she had done earlier. Then followed the staff member back inside. The judges were seated as before, but the mood had changed. Papers were set aside. Faces were more open. "Please sit," one of them said. She did. They spoke to her honestly. They told her that what she played stayed with them, that it was not perfect in the usual sense, but it was something rarer. They said they could not ignore it. Then one of them told her the decision. For a moment, she did not fully understand the words. They seemed to float in the air between them. When meaning finally settled in, her chest tightened and her eyes burned, she nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly. There were no tears yet. Those would come later in private. The judges stood as she left. One shook her hand. Another wished her well. Their voices carried respect, not pity. Back in the hallway, the atmosphere had shifted again. The audition continued, but people looked at her differently now. Some with admiration, some with curiosity, some with something close to humility. She walked past them, not rushing, not slowing, simply moving forward. Outside, the late afternoon light warmed her face. She stopped on the steps of the building and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile fully. The days that followed were not magically easy. Life did not suddenly transform into something perfect. She still woke early. She still worked hard. She still worried, but something inside her had changed. She practiced with renewed purpose. Not chasing approval, but honoring the chance she had been given. The piano was no longer just a private escape. It was a bridge back to the world she once believed had forgotten her. People noticed at rehearsals. Others listened when she played. Some asked about her journey. She shared only what felt necessary. She did not dress differently. She did not try to become someone else. She remained herself. There were moments of doubt, of course. Old habits returned late at night, whispering that she did not belong. When that happened, she went back to the piano and let the music answer for her. Weeks turned into months. The program demanded discipline and patience, but she gave both willingly. She learned, adjusted, and grew. Her hands grew stronger, her confidence quieter, deeper. One evening, after a long session, a younger performer approached her. "I almost didn't audition this year," they admitted. "Seeing you play changed my mind." The woman thanked them. Surprised by the weight of the moment, she realized then that her impact had gone beyond a single room and a single day. The memory of the laughter before her audition faded with time, but it never disappeared completely. It became a reminder not of pain, but of how easily people can be wrong. She did not hold resentment. She understood now that most judgment comes from habit, not cruelty. From fear, not truth. Whenever she returned to that concert building, she paused in the hallway where she had once stood unnoticed. She remembered how small she felt that day. Then she remembered the sound that changed everything. Her story did not end with fame or headlines. It ended with something quieter and stronger, belonging, not because others allowed it, but because she claimed it. And every time her fingers touched the keys, she reminded herself that being ordinary does not mean being invisible, and being underestimated does not mean being unworthy. Sometimes, all it takes is one honest moment for the world to finally listen.